So, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about something that's probably going to be a title that you haven't seen on the Ambitious podcast so far. And this is one of the experts we are going to be bringing on that's going to be starting a new lens of ambitious. We're going to be talking about a more wider variety of topics that are going to support women like yourself who are both driven in business, but also in your everyday life. And today we are talking with Rena Martine, who we're going to be talking with about all things sex and intimacy. We cover why we feel, even just in saying that, you might be feeling, oh my gosh, this is something so different to be listening to have Kate talk about on the show. We're going to talk about that. We're going to say, why is sex and intimacy something that still for many feels so taboo? We're going to talk about the role of shame and how shame plays a role in our perception around our sexuality. Understanding the difference between what is sex with ourselves or our partners versus what is intimacy. How do we reframe sexuality and understanding pleasure for ourselves and for our partners? And how do we communicate our desires and strengthen connection within our relationships? I am so excited for today's episode. I have had the absolute pleasure of getting to know personally all of the works of Rena and what she has done. She is a women's intimacy coach, educator, author who is dedicated to empowering women to embracing their sexuality and cultivating a deeper, more intimate relationship with themselves and with others. She has a background in law and personal journey of overcoming sexual shame, and now she focuses on helping women to achieve a fulfilling, shame-free sexual experience. She's a former deputy district attorney who specialized in child abuse, sex crimes, and domestic violence cases for 14 years in LA County, who provided then through that a deep understanding of trauma and its impact on intimacy. From there, she then started and founded Shameless Coaching, which is a 8-week program that is designed to use evidence-based techniques to help women to better understand and love their bodies, experience deep intimacy, and have great sex without the shame. She's also the author of The Sex You Want, publishing a book that is really helping to redefine our journey with intimacy and offer a honest view on how to have a life free from sexual shame. She's not only that, but a TEDx speaker who also has given talks on sexual shame and sharing insights from both her personal and her professional journey. Rena has such an insane wealth of knowledge from all the experience of her career, plus all of her work with clients. And I could not be more excited for you to dive into today's episode. So without further ado, let's get into today with Rena. Rena, welcome to Ambitious. I'm so excited to have you here. We are excited to dive into so many things because I obviously was just saying, guys, before we press record, she has an absolutely incredible book, which we're going to be unpacking today. But I feel like I could probably interview you for like 4 hours because you know so much. So we're going to try to keep it into the 60-minute mark, but we're excited to have you here. So welcome to Ambitious.
Thanks for having me, Kate.
Yeah, I want to start off today because I feel like for anyone maybe who even press play on this episode or someone who is wanting to listen to this, I was prepping for today's episode and our interview. And it was interesting because when I had mentioned it to a couple people, what we were going to be talking about, I could physically see their state change when I had talked about the fact that we were going to be covering intimacy and sex and pleasure and things like that. And they said, are you nervous to have this interview, to talk about this in a public way? And so what it instantly brought forward for me was this aspect of shame that we all have connected to, or that, and I shouldn't say we all have, that many people have connected to what we're going to talk about today. And I know you talk a lot about this within your work. So I'm curious, why is that still today, even after so much that's unfolded, still something that feels so taboo in your opinion?
Woof. I mean, that's the $1,000,000 question, right? Because sex is something that we have all done, we are doing, or we want to do, unless, of course, you fall on the asexual spectrum, different story. But it's this thing that is so ubiquitous, it's so common, yet we have such a hard time talking about it. So, why is that? I mean, could I go down all the lists about the patriarchy, X, Y, and Z? I mean, I
Yeah.
think a lot of this is rooted in patriarchy. A lot of this is rooted in religion when it
Mm.
comes to not wanting folks to have sex outside of marriage, a gendered view about what women should and should not be doing with their bodies. Because when we look at different cultures, different countries, sex is really, it's not just a thing we do. There's a sociological, there's a cultural aspect to it. So here in the Western world, our views of sex aren't necessarily the same as they would be in other parts of the world.
Mm. And do you feel like with, I'm sure even with the clients that come to work with you, do you ever feel like even people wanting to reach out to get support from you, I'm sure there must be an aspect of potentially shame or kind of feeling that it's super private to them and not knowing how to talk about it?
Yeah, yeah. And, when I tell folks, because not everybody walks around using the word shame, but
Mm,
anytime a question starts off with, or you think this to yourself, is it normal that XYZ,
mm,
right? Is it normal that I need a vibrator to orgasm? Is it normal that I'm not in the mood at night, right? What's wrong with me that XYZ?
mm,
So anytime you find yourself thinking or saying one of those things, that is shame. Shame is this feeling that there is something wrong with us, with our bodies, with our attractions, right? How we look, how our bodies function. And that because there is something wrong with us, we are therefore not worthy of the same thing that the average air quote sexual person is worthy of. So, in terms of how this shows up in my business, it's normally that, there's something that's making me feel like I'm not normal. I haven't figured this thing out. The reality is, I mean, there's no one normal when it comes to sex. And
yeah.
it's so much not learning but unlearning that we do during our time together in the coaching space.
Right, because I would imagine, you even see I'm thinking of things like when I years ago would read things like Cosmopolitan, who would talk about, the X amount of times you're supposed to have sex a week, or the X amount of, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, what's normal in a relationship. And I know, today we're going to unpack the individual in connection to their partner. But I think it's helpful for someone to hear that there isn't a normal, because I think to your point, we always have this benchmark of like, do I want too much of this? Is there something wrong with me because I have a low libido and I'm not as interested? And I think, specifically because obviously a lot of our listeners are women, I think that there's a lot of women who maybe even potentially compare themselves to other women when we have these conversations in private, wondering, what is normal or that benchmark. So, really, what you're saying for anyone listening is whatever we're going to talk about today, there really isn't considered a quote unquote normal or standard in any of this.
Right. Right.
Okay,
I mean, it's all
amazing.
just different points on a spectrum when it comes to pretty much most things sex related.
Got it. Okay. So one of the places I want to start is if somebody is wanting to kind of change their relationship to feel more positive, more open, more comfortable with their sexuality. To your point earlier, maybe they came from a household where this was kind of not talked about. Hello, me, my family, anyone in my family, like sex is not something you talk about. This is considered a very private thing that you do not discuss with your family, your friends, anybody. And for me, it was very new. And obviously, us working together and getting exposure to your book and all of the things, it really, the way that you talk about it, it makes it so open and so comfortable and so normalized. And I'm curious for someone who maybe comes from a culture or feels like maybe they're in a current environment right now where it's not quote unquote typical or normal for these conversations to happen. And maybe they're even listening to you already talking and they're already kind of uncomfortable.
Squirmy.
How did,
Yeah.
yeah, like feeling a little squirmy inside. How do we start to get comfortable with our sexuality if maybe until now it's been something that has kind of felt taboo to us or maybe in our circles?
I mean, that's a huge question, right? But I think that we can kind of break this down into a few different components. One is understanding what those messages are that you got. Who
Mm,
were they coming from? And the person that you got this from, have they done the thing that you're trying to do? Because I always say, don't take criticism from somebody you wouldn't take advice from. So
yeah.
I have my clients, and also if you end up getting my book, there's an exercise in there called the external messaging inventory. And so going through, okay, what's currently kicking around in your head about what it means to be a woman, about self pleasure, where did you learn that from? And so we start to really pick apart all of these things. And then I encourage my clients as an additional homework assignment to write a story of their life where they make themselves the hero. And this isn't the size of a book or the length of a book. This is, a small homework assignment. And it ends with where they are today. And so it's saying, yeah, you know what? Here's how I grew up. Here's what I've survived. Here's what I was taught. But today's the day I start doing things differently. And what that next step is going to vary woman to woman, person to person in our work together. And what that shame looks like is going to vary, whether you have survived sexual trauma, whether you were raised in a culturally religious environment, whether you've just come out, right? There's so many different types of shame. And so, although all of my clients go through a structured 8-week program, it's not a group program. I work with folks one on one because a lot of people feel awkward enough talking to just
Yeah,
one
it
person
takes
about
time
it.
to get there to wanna talk about it in an open forum. Yeah.
Right. And so giving people this safe container and knowing that I'm going to meet you exactly where you're at and that I know your needs are different than a client who say is like, me and my husband, we've been together 20 years and our sex life sucks. Please help us, Rena. Right.
Yeah.
Or, hey,
Yeah.
we want to open up our relationship. So everybody's coming from different angles.
Mm.
And so you have to really treat everyone from a very individual standpoint.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And you were mentioning like what their needs are. And I know one of the things that I definitely want to clarify for anyone listening is this kind of definition between intimacy versus sex. Because obviously, as we go through today's conversation, those words are probably going to be used interchangeably. And I'm curious to you with the clients that maybe you work with, and when you start a process like this of potentially releasing some of that shame or starting to introduce someone kind of back to themselves or to their relationship, how do you help someone to understand that differentiator between what is intimacy versus what does it mean to kind of tap into the sexual side, in your opinion?
Right. So I see kind of like a Venn diagram because you can have sex without intimacy and you can have intimacy without sex. So, what do I mean by intimacy? And I'm so glad you brought this up because a lot of people will use intimacy, the word, as just this kind of
Yeah, like we're
shorthand.
being intimate. We're intimate often, right? So it gets
Yeah,
interchanged. Yeah.
right, this shorthand for sex. And I don't use it that way. Intimacy to me is knowing who you are and showing up that way and letting people see you for who you are. So, you can have sex, but if you are not speaking up for your needs, if you are faking orgasms, you're not having intimacy. That's
Mhm.
sex. I mean, anyone for the most part can go through the mechanics of sex,
Right.
but to show up, to not be wearing a mask, to be your full messy self, that's different. I worked with a client, she had no issues with sex. So she wasn't faking orgasms, anything like that. She was having a ton of sex, kinky sex, enjoying herself. But she came to me because she's like, the sex will end. And then I want these people out of my house. Like, I
Mm.
don't want to talk to them. I don't want
There's
to
no
form.
other connection there. Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
she was scared of emotional closeness. That has nothing to do with
Mm.
sex. And so much of the work that we did together had nothing to do with sex because she kind of had that part down. It was her becoming emotionally vulnerable with coworkers, with friends, with family members. This might come as no surprise to you and I, Kate,
Yeah.
but she is a high achieving, no nonsense woman who's
I was
kind
like, I feel like I know her. I feel like I
of
know her.
right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we started with baby steps. I was like, I want you to reach out to 5 friends of yours this week
Mm.
and tell them why you're grateful for them. She was like, oh God, what?
No, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's literally as you were saying that, I was thinking of how many girlfriends that came to mind because I think intimacy, if we're looking at it really as this aspect of an underlying lens of connection, there could be physical intimacy, there could be emotional intimacy, but I'm thinking really what the basis of it is based on what you're saying is vulnerability and connection. And so I'm curious, how do women avoid that? Like this client I'm thinking of, or maybe there's others that you're thinking of. What were things that you saw in her that were signs, in your opinion, that she wasn't comfortable being vulnerable or that maybe she wasn't comfortable being intimate?
Yeah, I mean, because she said, I had sex with this guy recently and he asked me if I wanted to stick around and watch The Simpsons afterwards, and it made my skin crawl. What's wrong with me?
Is this normal? Yeah.
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 And she
Yeah.
also said that so she travels for work. She works in the arts and she's constantly traveling with a crew of other coworkers. And she's like, I find myself just judging them all the time.
Mm.
judging them. And so I'm putting all these pieces together like, okay, you you don't truly know yourself, and so you have a hard time opening up to other people. And why is that? So we're not going full-blown therapy here because she had a therapist. She had a therapist she'd be going to
Yeah.
for years when we started working together. But okay, where did it start that you felt like it wasn't safe for you to have needs and, just kind of express who you are? So we went through that. And then by the end of our work together, she'd done a tremendous amount of work through action and not just sitting around talking about it. But you are going to go out and do XYZ. You're going to go send those texts. You're going to invite a few coworkers of yours out to get drinks after work. So letting her know it's safe to let her guard down. It's safe to show vulnerability. It's safe to not have your shit together all the time. And I know
Mhm.
that's hard for
Yeah.
folks like, and I'm looking at you right now because we know each
Yeah.
other too outside of the space, but
Yeah.
that can be really hard, especially in a world that has rewarded us for having our shit together all the time.
Well,
But
and I think in
yeah,
a way it feels, as you say that, kind of uplifting and kind of exciting, because I'm thinking if someone is not comfortable being intimate or comfortable being vulnerable, it's also kind of uplifting to know that you don't have to start that process with a partner. Like if you're somebody who is either having different sexual partners right now or you have an ongoing long-term relationship, you don't necessarily, if you're feeling disconnection in those partners or with that relationship, you don't have to start with them. You get to start with basically flexing the muscle in other areas before you start to bring that back to your point, the sexual side of things.
exactly. Exactly.
Got it.
And an exercise I give readers that I give my clients is, okay, this week ask 5 people for help. Like, but I
Mm.
never ask people for
I
help.
was
I'm like, well, you're gonna do it this week.
I
It
gotta do it
doesn't have
now.
to,
Yeah.
and it can
Yeah.
be something small. Hey, a book recommendation, whatever it is, but letting people know that you're not an island.
Mm.
There's a whole chapter in my book called Stop Playing the Cool Girl. And I say
Mhm.
you can be the cool girl or you can have true love. Pick one. Because
Mm.
oftentimes there's a particular breed of woman who will go into relationships and be like, I have no needs. I'm so cool. Like, I'm chill. I don't cause drama. And the thing is, we can't keep that act up forever. And so once that act comes down, this
Mm.
poor person who's been in a
Yeah.
relationship with you is like, wait, who is this? And
Yeah.
that's where we see problems. So it's a matter of getting rid of that temptation to play the cool girl in the first place.
Well, I'm thinking of like everyone I coach basically and myself. And I'm thinking of how we are in business to your point of like those high achieving women, because I think in business, we're so I've got shit handled. I've got it taken care of. I can take care of
Mhm.
myself. I don't need anybody else. Like you're just making things happen and you're really driving in that. And so I'm thinking to be vulnerable to your point of like asking for someone else to be let in, to be seen, to let your guard down, to be vulnerable kind of goes against the hat we wear all day, every day.
Yeah.
And for me, it's interesting. I will say, like, in, being alone and starting to kind of figure all of this out for myself without it necessarily being a connection to a partner. What I realized was like, I like that side of maybe not having as much of that intense vulnerability within business, but once my business hat is off, like I don't want to be necessarily driving all the time. And I find that in connection with other people now, I really like that intimacy part in my personal life because I find without it, there was just such a disconnection. I was like completely closed off from just so many people in my life. So I'm thinking for that person who's very driven, I'm sure that that must be very common.
It is. And the exact traits that make us good inside our careers are the things that often will damage us in the bedroom if we take them home. And I
Mm,
don't know if we've mentioned this yet, but like I used to be a lawyer. I was a trial attorney for 14 years. And so I had to, and I was a sex crimes prosecutor. I talked about sex all the time. I talked about sex every day. I couldn't have done my job if I didn't know how to talk about sex. But
mhm,
talking about sex in terms of my wants and needs were, that was a totally different story. If I could talk about it clinically the way I was doing it at work, fine.
no
But
emotion.
right? And
Hmm.
so that was, again, a lot of undoing that happened there. But Yeah, there's a particular kind of client who I really love working with, and those are the real high-powered CEOs who come in
Yep.
and we practice with just surrender. And
Mm,
I'll go off on a small tangent here, and I swear it'll be quick, but we have shown that year after year, more and more women had been fantasizing about being sexually submissive. So we think about 50 Shades of Grey, that kind of thing.
mhm,
And the reason is because we are having to make more decisions in our day to day lives than we ever have. And so, of course, we are fantasizing about a world where, oh my God, I can just come into the bedroom and somebody makes the decisions for me. My only job is just to be here. Oh gosh, that sounds so nice. And
mm,
so, with folks who I work with who fall into this category who are partnered, that's a way that we can start to gently incorporate that in the bedroom is giving up some of that control and just saying, you know what, me feeling good is enough.
yeah.
Mission accomplished. I don't actually have to do any more than that.
Mm. Well, I feel like to your point, there's a lot of performing in business, and to feel like you finally have a space where you don't have to quote unquote perform is really just like a weight off in a way. Cause to your point, and I love what you said, you just get to be. You just get
Yeah.
to be seen, to be present. And so someone's listening to this and now they really feel like they understand what intimacy is. What is that connection between intimacy and sex? Because
Mhm.
even to the point that you gave earlier, is there even a connection in the sense of can they be entirely separate, i.e., you can have such a deep connection with someone and be deeply intimate with someone, but have no sexual connection?
Yeah.
Or you could have a sexual connection with someone and have no intimacy. And then I'm wondering for the person who has maybe a partner that they're with that they want to have both, like what is the kind of relationship to your point between those?
Well, so I mentioned the Venn diagram earlier, and that's the sweet spot, really, is where
Okay.
sex and intimacy overlap when we have both. If we're talking about
Okay.
sex, because I believe that for relationships to be significant, they don't need to be sexual. We have partnerships, friendships, familial relationships that are no less important. But in the confines of a romantic relationship where both of you guys want to have sex on the table, sexual intimacy is the thing, the acme point, the thing that is going to change what sex becomes for you. I'll quote Esther Perel here because she says, sex isn't a thing we do, it's a place we go.
Mm,
And I, in seeing just my own trajectory of not really understanding that sex and intimacy were two different things, and that once you put them together, oh my gosh, it's so much more magical. Sex has become just an experience. It's become a way that we get to play as adults. It's a place of freedom. And that is what sexual intimacy to me is. It's playing, it's showing up, it's not being self conscious. It's just, hey, this is who I am. This is what my body looks like. I'm, yeah, I got rolls here. Like, yeah, my boobs are
yeah.
saggy, whatever the case may
Yeah.
be. Am I saying you can flip a switch and it's going to be great tomorrow? Absolutely not. Everything's done in baby steps. But what'll happen when you just kind of take your hands off the wheel? You're like, no, this is me and I'm showing up this way, is you have freedom to explore in a way, freedom to challenge some of these scripts that you thought like, well, we have sex and so this is how it starts.
This
This
is
is
how it
the
goes.
position, right? This is how we change and this is how
Yeah.
we end. So like
Yeah.
for example, I'm working with a couple right now. They've been together I think about 12 years and they have a little one at home. And one thing we did during our last session was we talked about, well, what's the sexual script that you two normally have? What does that look like? Like, well, normally it's some sort of like oral on me, meaning the wife, and then eventually it's him on top, and then we finish with him on top. It's like, okay,
Mm,
so I'm going to set a timer. Each of you is going to grab a piece of paper, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and I want you to come up with 5 different sexual scripts that you would be good with.
mm,
So then they came back. And by the time our session was done, we had essentially 10 different scripts that they each agreed. And we did some bargaining there. She's like, no, I don't like that position. Okay, well, let's try this instead. 10 different scripts. Like, hey, instead of me finishing on top, maybe it's, you're sitting on my face while I use my hand on myself. Just these things that, like,
yeah.
Our brains like routine. Our brains like to conserve energy. And so it's often, someone like me who comes in and says like, hey, okay, we're going to use some energy here because the whole reason you came to me is because things feel stale. Because you're not going to crave something you don't crave. You are not going to crave boring sex.
Mm,
Oftentimes when folks say, I'm just not in the mood anymore, it's like, well, tell me what sex is like typically in your relationship. And they tell me,
yeah.
and I'm like, does that sound fun? I wouldn't be
Well, like,
craving
you're
that
not
either.
excited because you literally know play by play, screen by screen what's about to happen. So there's no, I would assume, like, fantasy or drive or excitement to, like, what's going to unfold. It's the rerun of the movie that you've watched 82 times.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
Which means that if you've already seen the movie 82 times, your mind's probably not going to be present the 83rd time that you watch it.
Yes.
Just like
Yeah.
your mind's going to be wandering during this sex that follows this well-worn groove in this script. And so part of what I help folks do, and I give a lot of ideas in my book too, is take a step back and kind of push the hard reset and say, let's approach this differently. Rather than an item on our to-do list, how can we view this as an escape from the to-do list? How can we make this something we look forward to rather than, ugh, right?
I know I
Um,
have to do this to maintain my relationship. Yeah. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. So make sex fun again. And for a lot of folks, especially those who've survived sexual trauma, that can feel like a really tall order.
Mm.
And in those cases, I mean, I could spend an hour just talking about that, reclaiming
Yeah.
pleasure after trauma, but there are very specific ways to go about that. There's an entire chapter in my book about trauma. So I would urge folks, if that part resonates, to check out the
Yeah.
trauma chapter.
So, we're taking a little break from today's episode because I want to tell you about something really exciting. And no, this is not an ad that's going to be selling you something. This is actually something I want to give to you for free. And if you're listening to today's episode with Rena, you're going to hear us talking about her book called The Sex You Want. And so before we dive back in, I want to share something really exciting with you. As you know, we are all at, Kate Perkovic as the brand and also Ambitious as a brand, really all about empowering women. And obviously, in honor of today's episode, it's all about embracing yourself and stepping into who you are and empowering yourself to the next level, not only in your business, but also in things like today's topic of relationships and intimacy. So we are giving away 7 copies of Rena's incredible book called The Sex You Want. 7 copies completely free to give to you to give you even more of today's information in your hands at home. And so if you are wondering how to get this book, I'm going to give you a quick peek of how you're going to do that. So if you go to the show notes of today's episode, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on an audio platform, click the link and join us inside of Ambitious Network. The Ambitious Network is a community that is designed for women just like you. It is completely free, and it is a resource area for you of trainings from me, exclusive information from our guests, just like this book, and so much more when it comes to hot seat coaching, feedback, anything that can help you with your ambition to go to the next level. So all you need to do is click the link in bio below, join us inside of the Ambitious Network, and there you will see that you can enter for the giveaway of the 7 copies of The Sex You Want. So without further ado, let's get back into today's episode. You mentioned being in your body and like acknowledging the roles, or I'm thinking about like acknowledging that maybe there's hair that you don't usually have there and that it's hyper aware for you because you didn't get around to it this week or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
And I'm curious for someone who maybe feels like when they're trying to be sexual with a partner, how do we get out of our head? Because like I've read, there's another book. Basically, my two bibles on this topic are Rena's book, The Sex You Want, and also Come As You Are was the other one that was really, really insightful for me.
Yep.
And it was talking in depth in the book about how many women are in their head thinking about, I got to do laundry, I got to make sure I do groceries, I do have that email to send later, in the midst of being in an interaction with another person. And so I'm curious, does it start with us? Like, does it start with the individual? As in, if someone's wanting to change what their sex life looks like, or potentially change, like I'm thinking of this client, the way that they're able to be intimate with people, is this a partner job? Or do you always feel like there's opportunity for people to start to come back to themselves before going and integrating a partner into it?
I think you absolutely do not need a partner. I think even if you are a partner, you start with yourself before introducing any kind of homework to your partner. because oftentimes we can't remember the last time we felt sexy. So, hey, when's the last time you felt sexy outside of the bedroom? What was it about that? Well, I just got my nails done. I got a new thong. I mean, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's piecing that apart, because if you are not turned on by yourself, if you don't find yourself attractive, it's absolutely going to follow you into the bedroom, and you're going to be like, well, what's wrong with this fool over here? He thinks I'm hot. Like, I must have
Mhm.
not picked well, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yes, absolutely. It starts with you, but I'll give a few tips, because even the most well intentioned sexual encounters can involve our minds wandering, because our brains don't like to shut up. They like to wander all the time. They like to solve problems.
Why
So,
meditation's so hard. Yeah.
yes. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
it's so hard for me too.
Yeah.
So a hack, much like with meditation, they say if your mind wanders, come back to the breath. I tell folks, if your mind starts to wander during sex, come back to just one place on your body where you're feeling touch or sensation, and just keep bringing it back. Your mind wanders 100 times, bring it back 100 times. You can also have some music playing, light a candle, something so that if your mind starts wandering, you can say, okay, focus on a sound. Okay, focus on a smell, and bringing you back into the room. These are just regular grounding exercises that we use in day to day life. Regarding being okay with how you look naked, because some people are like, I don't want the lights on. I describe one such person in my book who'd been married for a long time. And she's like, nope, must be pitch black in the bedroom. And so we started off with like, okay, how about you leave the light on in your closet and you leave
Right.
the door just open a tiny bit. And so we started there and we worked our way up. By the time we were done, she was having daytime sex with her husband, which is
Got it.
great, right? But baby
Yeah.
steps. Oh my gosh, this happened. The sky didn't fall. I still felt good and turned on. And this is kind of an aside, but I'm going to share it anyway. A client I have right now went to an all women's sex play party recently.
Mm.
She had no experience with women at all, but it was something she wanted to explore. So I kind of helped
Yeah.
her figure out how to do that. And she came back and she had done a little bit of exploration, but she said, you know what? It gave me so much grace for my own body, because
Mm.
seeing these women who their bodies, if we're on a scale of, perfect or ideal body type, they look not that, and how
Mm.
confident they were and how sexy I thought they were. It
Mm.
made me think like, oh yeah, I'm viewing them from much kinder eyes than
Yeah.
I'm viewing myself. So whether it's the accounts you follow on social media, the porn you watch, or these little hacks for mindfulness in the bedroom, don't underestimate these kinds of messages that are coming in that are telling you who
Right.
is and who is not allowed to be sexy.
And again, like what's like quote unquote normal,
Right.
right? And
Right.
I'm curious, you know, with a partner, because I know one of my peers who's a sex educator had talked about getting to know your own body before expecting somebody else to know it. And
Mhm.
I remember this is years ago. I saw her mention this in a talk, and I know that you've talked about this as well. And I'm curious if you could explain that to someone, because I think there's also kind of a little bit back to the shame piece. I think there's people who have normalized the belief of sexual interaction with a partner,
Mhm.
but sexual interaction with yourself feels like it's not something that's quote unquote, to your point earlier, normal, and therefore not something that's really openly talked about. And so I think this is a really, again, safe space and intentional place for the person listening to be able to get some insight on, what is the role of, self intimacy or self pleasure in bettering your ongoing intimacy with other people or your ongoing pleasure with other people.
Yeah. Well, if we think about just kind of taking a step back, why is it that women have a different kind of self view and societal view around self pleasure than say men do? And from a very young age, boys are touching their penises every time they have to go to the bathroom. They're holding their penises, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Their penises have various functions. One's for urination, one's, intercourse, reproduction. But for us little girls, normally, and I'm being very cis-normative
General.
in my
Yeah.
discussions here. I'm just going to acknowledge that. But for little girls, really, we're not making much skin to skin contact with our genitals. If we're wiping, we're using toilet paper. We're in the shower, we're using soap, we're using a loofah, whatever.
Mhm.
But so there isn't just this kind of normal way, like this oops, like I happen to be touching this part of my body.
Right.
So you have to be so much more deliberate about it. The data tells us that girls start masturbating much later than boys do. They
Mm.
start having orgasms much later than boys do because there isn't really an appropriate avenue to give them permission to touch themselves in that way.
Mm.
So, a large part of what I do with my clients, with my readers, is encouraging you to do a practice. It's called Sensate Focus. It was designed for couples, but I have tweaked it a bit to make it just something you do on your own. So, essentially, you spend 15 minutes going through your body and just doing G rated touch. So, like, oh, what kind of scalp rubs do I like? Do I like a firm touch on my thighs or a soft touch? And so, if you are a client of mine, we're doing this during session. You are nude, your camera is off, but I'm guiding you through this because I know if I tell you just to do this on your own, you're probably not
You're
going
not
to do
gonna do
it.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh no, I'm here. We are doing this right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can count on one hand out of, over 100 people, the number of folks who are like, oh yeah, I've done something like that before. Because most of us, it's like we
Mhm.
touch ourselves when we're putting lotion on, but we're
Yes.
not,
Yeah.
we're not
Present.
curious.
Mm.
And so that is the G-rated version. We're not doing anything sexual. And then part of the homework is, okay, now do the less G-rated version of this
Mm.
and speak out loud. Practice using your words to an imaginary partner. This is going to feel silly. Yes. But if you can say, yeah, you know what? I've used these words before, even if no one was there the first time I use them, it's going to be a lot easier to use them the next time. So like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, I like it when you touch me like this or a little bit faster, a little bit slower. So you are practicing on your own. Again,
Mm.
baby steps, baby steps. Otherwise your brain will be like, Mayday, we're not doing this.
This is not something we've done before. We're not doing this
Heck
again.
no, no.
Yeah. Because I feel like that, which I want to dive into, which is communicating like your needs or your desires to a partner. And I think it really starts with you even understanding what those are. Because I think sometimes, at least again, general, so I'm saying this in a very general sense from just my own experience, when I've seen women who are talking about their sex lives, it's interesting because they'll note kind of to your point, the start, the middle, and the end, and the quote unquote accomplishment. And I think a lot of the time it's because in their mind, they have a certain specific script, to your point, of what they saw as the movie.
Mhm.
Then there's the man involved or another woman involved, and they're seeing a script that that person obviously has as theirs. And now the two have come together, and there isn't necessarily a shared script. And
Right.
so, because of that, I think that sometimes people don't even, because maybe they haven't taken the space with themselves, whether again, to your point, in a G rated version of just literally getting comfortable with your own body, or whether it is more in a sexual way. I think without doing that, in my opinion at least, could end up falling into this pattern of having a lot of expectations when we're not even really sure what we're asking for or what it is we even want.
Yeah, because we don't know that there are all these other options out there, right? If you grew up in a
Right.
teeny tiny town that has 3 restaurants there, you don't know whether you like Himalayan food,
Yeah.
right?
Italian and pizza and Chinese. That's what it
Right.
is. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what do you even mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so what do you do? Does it mean you have to go to every country on the face of the earth to figure out what kind of food you like? No, maybe you go to one place and you go to a buffet and you get to sample a bunch of different things. That's kind of, my role is giving folks like, here's the buffet. Here's how you sample
Mm.
different things, different tests and quizzes I will give people so that I kind of know like, all right, here's the thing you're into, but I'm not, putting these behind a paywall in terms of you have to work with me to know this stuff.
Yeah.
It's just there's so many different things I use and they're all in my book. So you can go there and look at, those things. But in terms of like watch some porn, figure out what stands out to you. What are you like? Oh, no, I did not like that. Or what were you like?
Mm.
I was actually kind of surprised that
Right.
turned me
I like the
on.
Himalayan food. I like the Himalayan
Right.
food.
Oh
Yeah.
my God, what was that spice in there? Like I've never had that before.
Well, like, so say someone feels like they're realizing they like the Himalayan food and they want to share that with a partner.
Yeah.
Communication, because I feel like in any dynamic with a partner, there's obviously what's spoken, there's what's unspoken, all of these different, expectations, as you're saying, the visions of what you want to have happen versus what does happen. Where does communication, in your opinion, play a role in connection and intimacy and then kind of leading into, sex with a partner or, with somebody else?
I firmly believe, and the data supports this, that you're going to have better sex if you can talk about sex outside of the bedroom. I
Mm,
encourage folks to have conversations about sex early on and not like, hey, we're going to have sex in a little bit. What are your views on XYZ? But just because
yeah.
that is a measure of compatibility. Hey, what are you into? And unfortunately, when we're talking about cisgender heterosexual couples, the script there is always so ingrained. When we're talking about two men, two women, there really is no script. And so you kind of have to talk about things.
Mhm.
So cishet couples have this advantage, air quotes, in that they have a workaround because they're like, oh, we'll just do kind of how like we're supposed to do it. You don't have to have the conversations. So those
Mm,
conversations can be incredibly scary to have outside of the bedroom. Hey, do you have any kinks? How do you define great sex? These are really
mm.
fun getting to know you questions that I people might be listening like, "Oh my god, there's no way I would ever." I ask those kinds of things on a first date. I understand
Yeah,
maybe not everyone does,
yeah.
but it's getting comfortable because here's what will happen is if you wait too long, for example, to gauge sexual compatibility,
Mm.
as some people, and it's normally women who do this, say, "I got to make him wait," right? What happens is say you get into the bedroom and you're like, "Ooh, this actually ain't so good, but everything else is really great."
Mm.
You kind of feel like a jerk for ending it there, and most women just don't. They stick around. And this, compatibility, yes, you can change some of the techniques and stuff, but if the compatibility isn't there, it can be hard to mimic that. And so I say even if you're not ready to have let's take off all of our clothes intercourse with someone or sex, however you define that, there are ways
Mm.
that you can gauge sexual compatibility ahead of time through conversations outside of the bedroom. There's so many games now you can play, like
Oh, so
card
many.
games,
So many.
so
Yeah.
many. So many. And if anyone's listening, if you want some recommendations, like shoot me a DM. I will tell you what some of my favorites are, whether you're early in dating, whether, you've been together a really long time.
Mm.
But for couples who have been together a long time, the data tells us that women who are able to talk comfortably with their husbands about sex outside of the bedroom, right off the bat, about half of them say, yeah, I'm very satisfied in my relationship. And for
Mm.
those who can't have those conversations, that number drops to under 10%. So
Wow.
instead of looking at these sexual conversations as, oh, a nice to have, a cherry on top, they can be the thing that makes or breaks your relationship.
Mm.
But no one's teaching us how to have them. So I'm not here shaming people like, you're doing, if you only had drink your water every day, right? Like, no
Yeah.
one's telling you how to have these conversations. And so that's why I think it's important. Read books, listen to podcasts like this or
Mm.
podcasts dedicated to sex.
Right.
See what it feels like to hear people talking about sex in the same way they'd talk about food or anything else in a non-charged, non-shame based way.
Well, I'm wondering for someone listening, because, like, okay, maybe they hear this and they think I'm inspired to have a conversation. You know what? Come to think of it, I haven't had really any kinds of conversations like that, and let's just call it the last 6 months. But maybe they feel embarrassed or they feel like it's going to feel so random for me to bring this up when I haven't talked about any of this. But, or maybe if they're especially in a long term relationship, they've been together for years. And to your point, there maybe is this pattern of how things have always been. Any recommendations for someone if they're feeling like I kind of am excited by this idea of having that conversation? That would be something I'd be interested in, but I just feel I don't even know where I would start and also kind of feel a little embarrassed to even introduce that.
Yeah. I always say throw Rena under the bus. Hey, I I was listening to a podcast with Kate Perkovic today, and she normally talks about XYZ, but today it happened to be about B or S, right?
That's true. You can throw us under the bus. Full permission.
Throw us
Full
under the bus.
permission. 100%.
And Rena challenged everyone who was listening that if you were a partner to go to your partner and say, hey, because again, this isn't your idea. This is Rena's idea and
Yeah.
Rena and Kate's idea. Hey, so the challenge was if you could rank what our sex life is on a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rank it? You guys maybe both write that down. Okay, what would bring it to a 10? And then you go through those things, but creating a safe space where you're like, all right, we know that the goal here isn't to say everything's perfect and we're both 10s. We're saying like, okay, this is a safe space. What would we each like a little bit more of? Because it might be, I want more frequency. It might be, hey, I just want it to last longer. I want a bit more oral. I want, right. And so creating this baby step kind of safe space as a starting point is something I find to be helpful. If that feels really scary, get one of the card decks. There are so many now. There's even
So
a free app by the Gottmans where they have little cards on the app, totally free. And taking turns asking your partner a question, whether it's like, okay, we're going to do the cards at dinner. Rena has challenged us that, every time we have dinner to ask each other 2 questions from this card deck. Again, this is a game. It's not you versus one another. It's you two versus the issue, the thing. The thing
Yeah,
here
as a
is
team.
sex.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'm wondering, like, even on that, if someone maybe has been in a long-term relationship and feels like things have felt a little routine, it has felt like the same script, or they feel like there's kind of this stagnation and they don't really know how to like reignite things. Or to your point in that game, they realize that maybe there are things they want to communicate with their partner that they haven't. And they're like, if I say this, this is what we've always done, or we've been doing this script for 3 years. And now I'm going to throw a wrench in and say, hey, I'd rather, or I would enjoy XYZ. How does somebody kind of reignite things if they feel like either intimacy would be one question, if that's faded over time? And maybe you're still going through the motions of having lots of sex, but it doesn't feel intimate and there
Yeah.
doesn't feel like there's that connection. Or maybe you have great connection and you're super intimate with each other, but when it comes to sex, it just kind of is not there. Like if you're
Mhm.
feeling that things have kind of lost their spark in a long-term relationship, where do we start?
Yeah. I mean, an easy hack for introducing new things is, hey, you know what might be fun to try? Because to your point,
Yeah.
like, I think a lot of people do worry, oh my gosh, if I bring up something new, my partner's going to think that it means they don't like what I've been doing this whole time.
Mhm. Mhm.
Let's use a food analogy here. No, you're just saying, I love tacos. I just don't want tacos 7 nights a week, right? I want some Italian food sometimes.
At the
Hey,
end of the day, use food. That's what I'm getting from this. I love tacos, just not every day. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
even your favorite food in the world from your favorite restaurant in the world, you don't want that, every night for dinner.
Right. Right.
So it's a matter of, hey, you know what might be fun to try? It's a matter of taking turns, whether that's like on dates. Oh, yeah, we have date night every Friday. Okay, cool. So, how about every other Friday, you're going to take turns planning what that date is? You can leave it a surprise for the other person. We're making this fun again. We're taking something that usually takes no mental bandwidth because it's routine, it's a well-worn groove, and we're just flipping it a tiny bit to make it more intentional because there's a difference between routine and ritual. One is imbued with meaning, one is special, one can bring couples closer together, and the other is just something we do on autopilot to get through the day to make our lives easier.
Mm.
So there are, I mean, Esther Perel has written an entire book on why do couples stop wanting to have sex over long periods of time. It's called Mating in Captivity. That was really the whole notion that catapulted her career because she was seeing this all over the place. And what she says is that fire needs oxygen to breathe and desire needs space. So, what do I mean by that? in our relationships, we need to create space. We need to create space. That can look like stop peeing with the door open. Okay. I'm not the what to,
Someone finally said it. Thank you. Thank you. Someone finally said
and
it.
I have
Yes.
no hangups around like anything when it comes to the body or like, oh, it's not proper. Just stop peeing with the door open, friends. Easy, easy number one hack I can give.
Yeah.
If you can live separately for a little bit longer, try that. If you can get ready for your date nights separately or meet at the
Mm,
restaurant, try that. So find ways where can I insert just a little bit of breathing room into my relationship. I often tell couples who already have date nights, we do it X number of times a month to say, all right, each of you gets a solo date night once a month too. And you can use your date night however you want to. You want to get stoned and play video games in the basement? Amazing. You want to go like get wasted with your friends and like take I don't know, like dance on a bar top or whatever? Amazing.
yeah. Yeah.
But you both need to remember who you were before you got into this relationship. So
Mm,
oftentimes before you became parents.
mm,
So it's reclaiming, creating a little bit of space. If you're on vacation together, plan an activity apart from one another. Give yourself something new to talk about. So there are so many ways to create space, but that's really the easiest way to start reinviting intimacy, desire, and eroticism back into your relationship
mm.
is by injecting just a little bit of breathing room.
And I'm curious on that. What if one of the partners has, say, a very high libido and is very, very feels like they're kind of on all the time and ready to go, and the other partner is not at the same pace in the sense of they don't really feel like they're on the same page. And maybe that's part of why over time it's felt like it's kind of feeling stagnant because the stagnate from the partner I'm thinking who has low libido, they may not even notice that there's an issue because to them they're totally fine with the frequency or the intensity of their sex life. But maybe the other person is either asking for more or the person who's not interested is having to participate more. How do you kind of navigate two parties having totally different libido, but obviously being in a long-term relationship?
Oh, there's so many questions I would ask there because and really teasing out like when did the low libido start? Has this always been the case that one person just has always had a low libido? Since you started dating, the other person's always had a high libido. Okay,
Mm,
what if the answer is yes, what were you doing at the beginning to reconcile that difference?
mm,
If the answer is no, like, hey, mine has stayed the same, but my partner's has just plummeted, I would want to sit down and have a conversation with the partner with the lower libido and be like, so let's talk about the plummeting part
mm,
and see what it is. But say it's a matter of like, there's just going to be a fundamental sexual incompatibility between you two. There's got to be workarounds. Some couples will have service sex, like, hey, I don't love tacos that much, but I know my partner loves tacos. So once a week, we have tacos together,
mhm, mhm,
right? Or it can be opening up the relationship to an extent that maybe just involves sex. It can be, partners engaging in more masturbation. I think really though figuring out like what is the meaning of sex for me, because oftentimes when we see folks who have a high libido who are feeling left behind by their partner who has a low libido, they feel unwanted, and not just in a sexual capacity, but like, hey, I want to have sex so that I can feel close to you.
mm,
And what are some other ways that I can feel close to you? There's a great book by Sarah Hunter Murray called Not Always in the Mood, and it's about the science of men and sex and relationships and
mm,
how we have so many myths that men are just raring to go all the time, that like, they actually like watching porn, like they think the women in porn are hotter than they think we are. I mean, all these myths that are
mm,
completely kicked to the curb in this book. And so she gives some advice in terms of, okay, how do you turn down sex, for example? Since oftentimes sex is a bid to connect, it can
mm,
be, hey, not in the mood now. Maybe we can try tomorrow. So you suggest a different time. And then you give something you can do in the meantime. Hey, do you want to cuddle instead?
Mm.
But say one partner, I was working with a couple, and one of the partners, he started taking medication that just made his libido so high all the
Right.
time. She's like, I can't, like, I just can't. And so the deal became like, okay, we're not going to expect that she can meet this like
Right.
unreasonable demand. Like it was a lot, but maybe she can be there sometimes while he meets that demand for himself, right?
Mm.
So he can have some of that closeness without her having to do more of the labor. These are just me throwing out ideas here. It's so much of it's
Yeah.
going to depend on the why and the specifics, but getting clear and asking, okay, has it always been the case here? And if it
Mm.
hasn't, what do we think is going on with this discrepancy? Is it something we can fix? If it's not, is this a fundamental incompatibility that might lead us to go
Mm.
our separate ways? Yeah. Lots
And
of
so
questions.
much to tease out. And yeah, as you were talking, I mean, just to be, a transparent share, I feel like when business was so stressful for me and I was under so much pressure, it was like the last thing on my mind. Like I didn't feel capacity to connect on an intimate level, and also didn't really feel capacity to be sexual either, because I was just, to me it was like, on like talking about spectrum, is on the total other side of the spectrum, emotionally, energetically, than how I was feeling. And I think, at least I'll speak for myself, I felt like a lot of shame around that, because it felt like, well, like I'm in a, at the time I was in a relationship, and a long-term relationship, and like I need to get myself together here because like my stress was impacting it. But before I started to correlate it to stress, I just thought there's something wrong with me. And I actually have talked to other women who've also said like theirs was not connected to stress, but just more of like an ongoing, like I just have in general low libido and I don't know what's wrong with me, because I think their partner had taken it as the belief that like they weren't interested, or they weren't, kind of like attracted to them, or all of these things. And so obviously I know libido, like, which is why I said at the beginning, like this could be a 5-hour show. I know
Yeah.
libido, even in itself, there's so many layers as to what can be in the underbelly of low libido. But if someone maybe feels like they are that person, is there anything that you find are sometimes, when you're saying you're teasing it out a little bit and kind of getting to the root, are there some commonalities that you see that maybe are not something, say, I'm thinking like the medication, like a biological, that are more almost like habit or lifestyle that impact that?
Yeah, I would, before going into that, like definitely I'm at the age where like perimenopause is becoming a thing, and you might want to get your hormones tested because that can absolutely impact libido. It makes sense that when you're stressed, you don't want to have sex. It's the last thing on your mind. But really figuring out or understanding that when it comes to desire, that most women, we have responsive desire and not spontaneous desire. So I'll use another food analogy because I love food analogies. Like me, Kate, I don't have a sweet tooth. Okay. I'm not one of those people who just like craves
I
sweet.
am that person. I'm a pan of
Okay.
brownies for breakfast.
Okay.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I,
I
I
love
have
it.
a cheese tooth. Okay. So I don't have a sweet tooth, but if I walk past a bakery and I
Mm,
smell like cookies or whatever, I see someone eating a cake on TV, I'm like, oh, yeah, I could go for something sweet right about now.
mm.
That's responsive desire. You waking up and being like, where's my brownies for breakfast?
Yeah.
That's spontaneous desire.
Yeah.
So when it comes to what the research tells us, is it tells us that most men are like you, Kate. They want those brownies, they want that sex out of the blue. And most women are responsive. They need something to get them in the mood for brownies. They need something to activate that sweet tooth. So instead of beating yourself up and saying, why am I not in the mood? The better question is, what could get me in the mood?
Mm.
And that's going to vary person to person. For some folks, it's okay, I'm going to make sure I'm done with work by this time. I'm going to take a bath and listen to some erotica, right?
Yeah.
It could be, I'm going to watch some porn. It can be, hey, throughout the day, I'm going to start a bit of a flirty text exchange with my partner.
Mm.
So don't beat yourself up for something that we're actually not designed to do. It's like,
Mm,
let's work smarter, understanding what we need to do here, and just figure out like, okay, what normally gets me in the mood historically, and
mm.
try to replicate that to the extent you can.
Well, like even as you're saying with the text during the day, I'm thinking for someone who, because obviously 90% of the people listening to this are busy entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
And so if I was to wave, a magic wand and come up with a movie, it would be you sit down and you work all day, you're super stressed, you close your laptop, you eat dinner, and by the time you're done, you're like, oh, the day's over tomorrow. And so that becomes this routine that happens. And so I'm curious if someone, maybe to your point, feels like they're in that rhythm, really what you're saying is you kind of need like a pattern interrupt. Do you find when you're recommending this, is it to get in your head or is it to get in your body or maybe even both?
Well, it's really to get yourself thinking about sex, because you're not going to
Mm,
accidentally start thinking about it when you're thinking about your business and things that feel more immediate. So,
mm,
in those situations, if you are a busy entrepreneur and you are in a relationship and you're like, oh my gosh, there aren't enough hours in the day. And even if
yeah,
there were, I don't feel like doing this anyway.
yeah, yeah.
I'm going to tell you this: scheduling sex is not boring. I think scheduled sex can be some of the hottest sex you can have, because you can spend all the time preparing for it, anticipating it.
Mm.
We don't say, oh, this vacation wasn't fun because I had to plan for it, or like this party
Yeah,
wasn't good because I had to
yeah.
plan for it. There are plenty of things we do all the time that we plan for. And by virtue of planning for them, we end up enjoying ourselves more.
Mm,
And so get rid of this idea. It's complete bullshit that planned or scheduled sex is boring. I don't care. Like, I don't know where this idea got kicked around, but it is not true. I would
mm.
argue that planned and scheduled sex can be some of the hottest sex you will have. And this doesn't need to be, we're getting it on the shared Google calendar. This could be, tell your
Yeah.
partner, hey, you know what? I want you to reach out to me once a week and be like, after dinner tonight, be in the bedroom wearing lingerie. That is planning.
Mm.
And then you're like, oh, I wonder what he's going to do to me. Like,
Yeah.
right?
Well, as you're saying that, I'm thinking when you're first dating, though, it is all planned. Like, you're like, I'll pick you up at 7, be ready at this time. And not again, not all women, but many women are like, I love that this person like takes charge and makes a plan. And, like when we're first dating, I feel like a lot of it can sometimes be planned. And so it's interesting that when you think about maybe being in a long-term relationship, how then the planning all of a sudden for some reason becomes a negative thing, when before, to your point earlier, it's like this anticipation and you're getting ready for like 2 hours before leaving trying to get ready for this date.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's anticipation. We like anticipation. If I know
Mm.
I'm going to my favorite restaurant tonight, I'm like, ooh, yeah, I'm already thinking about what I'm going to get
What I'm
there.
gonna order.
If
Yeah.
I open the
Yeah.
door and somebody has like plopped it on my doorstep, I'm like, whoa, where'd this
Yes.
come from? Like, I haven't
Yes.
built it up as much.
Yes.
So use that to your advantage. Do what you need to do throughout the day to help get you in the mood for it. And it gives you more time to prepare. The things that you mentioned earlier, getting your wax appointment done, whatever the case may be, like
Yeah.
things that
Yeah.
you think, oh damn, I wish I had known, I might have had more time, to figure out what was going to make me feel comfortable in the moment. You
Mm.
have that time if you can get it on the calendar.
And one thing that I also was wanting to expand on and go back to, because I know we briefly kind of glazed over it, was this dynamic between dominant and submissive. Because the thing that it's interesting, it came up actually, weirdly enough, masculine and feminine around dominant and submissive came up on a group coaching call of all things. And what we had been talking about was feminine, and sometimes feminine being about surrender and this aspect of, for some women, they had labeled it as being submissive. And naturally, all the feminists in the room were like, absolutely not. And all of this belief, right, about what submissive meant. And because we touched on it, I wanted to kind of go back to that because I think there is a big misconception around what it means, what it looks like. And for some people, I feel like just when they hear the word submissive, there's like this long history movie that gets played in our head of all different narratives and stories and timelines and all these things. And so I'm curious for the person who's listening, and maybe is that woman you were talking about earlier who is feeling like she's just go, go, go nonstop during the day, making decisions constantly on. And then to your point now is kind of okay, like I want to tune into my partner and I don't want to feel like I'm just ending work stressed and it's taking a toll on my relationship. But like, how do I do that while also trying to now figure out my dynamic of potentially going into this and going from dominant all day to being, say, submissive in the evening? So I'm curious if you could just maybe, you were mentioning myths, break some myths about the dynamic between dominant, submissive, and what that really means for someone listening. Because I know sometimes when people hear that word, it can kind of make them think specific things that I think are really rooted oftentimes in myths or misconceptions.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can talk about kind of lowercase dominant and submissive in terms of, I think in most sexual encounters, like there, it's not always like a 50-50 egalitarian in terms of like, okay, who's normally kind of like making the moves or initiating switching positions kind of thing. So,
Mm,
loosely speaking, there is normally some sort of power differential in the bedroom. What capital D Dom versus lowercase d, if we're talking about DS, D slash S, dominant slash submissive, what we're talking about is acknowledging these power differentials and playing with them. This
mm.
is pretend, people. This is play. This is cops and robbers for grown-ups with their pants off, as Dan Savage says. So I have heard so many people who are feminist who are like, oh, does this make me a bad feminist that I want someone to just come in and control me? No, actually, it makes total sense that you are craving something so different, that you feel that you have power and respect outside of the bedroom. So to drive this point home, if we look at the research behind who's fantasizing about what, this will kind of give you an idea. So we can look at religious people tend to fantasize more about like wife swapping. Why?
Mm.
Because it's the most taboo thing that you can
Yes.
possibly fantasize about is
Yes.
like watching somebody with your wife.
Right.
Progressive folks tend not to fantasize about that. They're more fantasizing about power differentials, about dominance and submission, because in their day to day lives, they value egalitarianism a lot more.
Mm.
So if we look at this, you can ask yourself, what is my sexual fantasy revealing about an emotional need that I'm having?
Mm.
And that emotional need can be, oh, I just don't want to have to make decisions in the bedroom.
Right.
The emotional need can be, I want my pleasure to be like the priority for once. So say you're the go, go, go entrepreneur during the day and this is resonating with you. Where do you go from here? You send your partner a text and you're like, hey, at this time tonight, I'm going to be waiting in the bedroom and I want you to come take me. That way you are still giving orders, but you're
Yeah.
giving orders to be like, take care
Yeah.
of me. I mean, we do
Right.
that all the time. We make
Right.
appointments to go get our nails done. We take our cars in to get them serviced. This is
Yeah.
saying like, please, I just need you to come and do this thing. And it adds an interesting dynamic. You can add a sleep mask into this to start
Mm.
gently experimenting with surrendering control. You can take turns, both of you, like, I'm going to be the dominant tonight, you're going to be the submissive, and just playing around with these power exchanges that are so, they're exaggerated, because in the real world we do have power imbalances between men
Right.
and women.
Right.
And so we are taking these, we are acknowledging them, and we're playing with them in the
Mm.
same way that the term queer used to be a slur against people in the queer community. What the community ended up doing was taking the word back. And they're like, you know what? We're going to start calling ourselves queer. So that way, when you say it, it doesn't actually bother us anymore.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of what we're doing, is saying, yeah, I'm going to choose to be submissive here. It's my choice.
I love that adding, like you're saying, like many feminists actually are people who have this desire, because really what you're saying is this is not a matter of taking away your power in a dynamic like this. It's actually a matter of acknowledging your power when you're doing
Mhm.
this.
Yeah.
which is huge. That's
Exactly.
the main reason I definitely wanted to hear you chat about that, because I know for many women who are listening to this, they're going to be thinking, okay, but like I'm raw women. I'm supporting women. I'm about female empowerment. How can this
Yeah.
be? And really what you're saying is that the two can coexist.
Yeah, I mean, so am I. Like, I
Yeah.
would say that the data tells us that it's women like us who tend to have these fantasies. So,
Mm,
not
so
always, but
helpful.
we gravitate towards them. 93% of women have fantasized about being sexually submissive. That's a lot. 93%.
93%.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's the data. The data tells us this is not just her opinion, you guys. It's the
No.
data. So you're good to go. You're good to go. Obviously, we covered a lot today, and I have like multiple copies of your book actually upstairs on my bookshelf. The book is absolutely incredible, you guys. It is literally like a
I'll hold it
woman's
up.
it's a Bible. Like I don't know how else to explain it. It's a manual, it's a Bible. It's just got so much in it. And today I really feel like was just genuinely such a surface of how deep you can go, not only in understanding yourself, but also this in connection to a partner. And I'm curious, Rena, for someone who's listening, there's two sides to this that I see. This is either maybe one of the first conversations that they saw the title, they're like, okay, I'm going to listen to this and see what it brings up for me. Or maybe somebody who is a little bit more comfortable with this conversation and wanting to explore more. Can you kind of break down just high level, what kind of are the stages of where people need to be or what they might be looking for if they're going to the book versus, say, coaching, or the different levels of depth, obviously, that are working with you?
Well, so with the book, in fact, a lot of the clients that come to me now are people who did read the book and they're like, "All right, I think I want that like individually tailored part of it. I want that accountability too." So, if you know that you're bad at doing homework and you're not going to do the homework in this book, I'm telling you, you will get entertainment out of it, but I don't know how much value you will get out of it. But it is entertaining because it's a book that is story based, stories from my life, stories from my clients' lives. So it's a story book. It's not I'm a PhD and I'm telling you as an expert how to do this stuff. I do cite people who are way smarter than me, but this is a book of stories. So I would approach that to understand, to normalize figuring out what it is you want. Some people like the book because you can do it at your own pace. Coaching is going to be a lot different than that. If you want to learn more about coaching and what that is, you can look at my website. But if you're looking to, all right, what's a podcast I could listen to that might help me? I love Dan Savage's Savage Lovecast because every week you hear from people all around the world. It's a call-in show. So you
Mm.
hear not just like, Kate and Rena as two,
Hmm.
experts on the things that we're experts in, but you hear from just regular people all around the world. And it helped me feel so much less alone during my own journey. So it's something I recommend to other folks. But yeah, I mean, I think don't feel like you are going to understand everything tomorrow or that you want to understand everything tomorrow. I'm
Mm.
still on my journey. And I don't want my journey to ever end because, life would be pretty boring if we felt like we had done everything and
We're
tried
done.
everything
Yeah.
and had
Yeah.
it all figured out. So give yourself some grace and enjoy the journey and enjoy the process.
And we always end every episode with a question, which is obviously, and especially for you being like, obviously, you've got an incredible book and you crush in speaking and coaching and all these things. And so we ask at the end of each episode what your advice might be as a one nugget or something for someone who is a very ambitious, driven woman.
Mhm.
And if you could give her any advice, and I'll give you a second because it doesn't have to be about today's topic, it can be about anything. And if it happens to be with today's topic, even better. But just anything that you might recommend to her because she's someone who is going for huge things, usually in business, in her life, in her relationship, which is why we're here today, and is trying to really expand and develop in every single area. And I'm curious, obviously, yourself, you're a very successful entrepreneur. Any advice that you have for the person listening, if you could give her a nugget or pass along some aspect of wisdom?
All right, hear me out. If you were to get hit by a bus, would you have any major regrets with how you were living your life? Whether that's how much time you're putting into your business versus spending it with your family, with the people who mean something to you, whether that's staying in a relationship that is maybe expired, right? Will you have accomplished everything you want to accomplish in life? No. But were you living your life in integrity? That's the question I ask myself all the time. Because, yeah, I want to keep accomplishing things and doing things. But today, was I living the way I wanted to live? And that would be my piece of advice.
You're doing and you're creating and you're achieving, but are you living?
Yeah.
It's powerful. Yeah. It's really good. Rena, this was so good. I feel like I could definitely, as I said earlier, go for like 3 hours. I'm like, I want an intimacy episode. I want a tactics episode. But if obviously people want to learn more, where's the best place for them to really like just sink their teeth into more or like an extension of all things from today's conversation?
Yeah, so Instagram is where I hang out most. And then I will point out that my book is available wherever you buy your books in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. So, yeah, all those different formats. But come say hi to me on Instagram. If you want to learn more about my coaching, you can head on over to my website, which is my name, renamartine.com.
And I will also say, guys, her Instagram feed alone is packed with information. Like the carousels that she's got on there and the information she has on there is like insanely valuable. You'll love it. So, Rena, thank you so much for today. It was so great. I feel like myself, I have so many things that are on my list of like takeaways. So, thank you for everything that you shared. And guys, please make sure that you go reach out with her on Instagram. Please go grab a copy of the book. You will not be sorry. There is so much information in it. If you just go to Amazon or, as she said, anywhere that you get your books, you can grab yourself a copy of that. But we will see you guys next week. And as always, stay ambitious.